Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back in time. And I'm sorry to say, the destination isn't a glamorous ballroom or a philosopher's salon. No, we're dropping you right into the muddy, grimy streets of 17th century England. A time when a simple paper cut could be a death sentence and your doctor was more likely to kill you than cure you. You're probably not going to survive the first day, if we're being honest. But that's what makes this so fascinating. Right, to see how people navigated a world without the safety nets we take for granted. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're re-listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into 2 nights' journey together. It starts with a feeling, a small, curious lump on the side of your neck, just below your jaw. You find it one morning while washing your face with a basin of cold water. It's no bigger than a pea, and it doesn't hurt. You dismiss it. A bug bite, maybe. A swollen gland from a passing cold. In a world full of immediate dangers, bad food, sudden fevers, a horse throwing a shoe at the wrong moment, a tiny, painless lump is the least of your worries. But it doesn't go away. A week passes, then 2, the lump is still there. And now it feels like it has a friend. Another small, hard knot is formed just beside it. You start to touch your neck more often. A nervous, secret habit. You trace their outlines through your skin, willing them to disappear. They feel stubborn, like little stones embedded in your flesh. There's still no pain, but a new sensation has taken root, a cold, creeping dread. Your life is one of routine. You wake with the sun. You work until your muscles ache. You eat a simple meal of bread and pottage. And you sleep. But this thing, this growth on your neck, has disrupted the rhythm. Your mind wanders at work. You catch your reflection in a puddle or a polished pewter plate, and immediately your eyes dart to your neck, trying to see if the swelling is visible to others. Soon, you don't have to wonder. It is. The lumps multiply, forming a strange, lumpy chain along the side of your neck. The area becomes tender. Turning your head is uncomfortable. Your collar, once loose, now chafes against the swelling. People at the market start to look at you differently. A furtive glance, a quick step away. The whispers begin, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the noise of the street. You don't need to hear the words to know what they're saying. You out. Desperation finally pushes you to seek help. You visit the local barber surgeon, a man who smells of stale blood and dubious herbs. His shop is a cramped, dark room, filled with gleaming tools that look more suited for a torture chamber than a place of healing. He has used it on a stool, and his rough fingers probe the swellings. He hums, he grunts, he talks about an imbalance in your humors, about bad air, about a weakness in your blood. He sells you a foul-smelling poultice made of things you dare rather not identify and gives you a list of foods to avoid. It costs you more money than you can spare. The poultice does nothing. The swelling gets worse. Some of the lumps have grown soft, their surface is turning a purplish, angry color. You feel a constant ache. You are tired all the time. The fear is no longer a quiet dread, it's a constant, roaring companion. You return to the surgeon, who now looks at you with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. He tells you the name of your affliction. It's scrofula, a word that feels ugly and alien in your mouth. But then he tells you its other name, the name everyone on the street whispers. He calls it morbus regis, the king's evil. This is the mainstream historical fact of our story. Scrofula was a horrificously common form of tuberculosis that attacked the lymph nodes, particularly in the neck. Instead of settling in the lungs, the bacteria caused the glands to swell, harden, and in many cases, rupture through the skin, creating open sores that would drain for years. It was disfiguring, chronic, and deeply misunderstood. And here's a little piece of trivia for you. It was called the king's evil based on an ancient belief that this specific disease was so uniquely stubborn, so resistant to all normal medicine, that it could only be cured by the legitimate, God-appointed monarch of the land. It was just a sickness, it was a spiritual condition that required a royal, divine intervention. Your diagnosis is a death sentence of a different kind. The surgeon has no cure. He can offer no hope. He has only given your slow, social decay a name. You are not just sick, you are afflicted with a disease that carries the weight of superstition and dread. Historians still debate to this day how many of the cases diagnosed as SC are of Euler wort really tuberculosis, and how many might have been other lymphatic ailments or even cancers, all conveniently swept under this one terrifying and enigmatic label. But for you, the label is everything. It explains the fear in your neighbor's eyes. It explains the sudden emptiness of the bench beside you at church. And it hangs a single, impossible, shimmering thread of hope in the suffocating darkness. The king. The words king's evil follow you out of the barber surgeon's shop and cling to you like the city's damp, cold-choked air. You step back into the river of noise and filth that is a London street. The world has stopped. A car rattles perilously over the cobblestones, its driver shouting at a stray dog. Women with baskets balanced on their heads call out the prices of their wares. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, damp wool, animal dung, and the faint, sweet sickly scent of decay that seems to seep from the very timbers of the buildings. Before, this was just the smell of home. Now, it feels like the smell of your own slow decomposition. You can't go home. Not yet. The thought of sitting in your small room, the silence amplifying the throb in your neck, is unbearable. So you walk. You wander through the labyrinthine alleys, your hand instinctively covering the side of your neck. Every person who glances your way seems to know your secret. Their eyes don't just see you, they see the disease. They see a moral failing, a punishment from God made manifest in your flesh. You are a walking omen, and people steer clear. But you're not ready to give up. The barber surgeon is a man of blades and leeches. Perhaps a man of powders and potions will have a different answer. You find an apothecary's shop, its window displaying dusty jars filled with mysterious, murky things. Inside, the air is a pungent cloud of dried herbs, spices, and chemicals. The apothecary is a thin, serious man with ink-stained fingers. He listens to your story, peering at you over his spectacles. He nods sagely, stroking his chin. He doesn't use the terrifying name King's Evil. He speaks in learned terms, of blockages and impurities. This brings us to a core piece of historical knowledge for this era, the theory of the four humours. For centuries, Western medicine was dominated by the idea that the body was composed of four fluids: blood, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was the result of these humours being in perfect balance. Sickness was a sign of an imbalance. The apothecary's solution, therefore, isn't to fight a germ, a concept that doesn't exist yet, but to restore your balance. He sells you a purgative, a violent laxative meant to expel the excess bad humours from your system. He also gives you a tonic made with groundwood lice and honey, meant to purify your blood. You spend the next week in a state of miserable weakness, the purgative leaving you drained and trembling. The lumps on your neck, however, seem entirely unimpressed by the turmoil in your gut. They are growing, and the skin over the largest one is stretched thin and shiny. The ache is constant. Your dwindling savings lead you next to a wise woman on the outskirts of the city, a last resort for those failed by conventional medicine. She lives in a small cottage that smells of wood smoke and damp earth. She doesn't talk about humours. She talks about ill wishes and bad spirits. Her cure is cheaper, but stranger. This is one of those wonderfully bizarre little tidbits of history, the use of sympathetic magic in folk medicine. She tells you to find a toad, kill it, dry it in the sun, and then sew it into a small silk bag to be worn around your neck. The idea is that the toad, a creature of the damp and dark, will draw the sickness out of you. You do it. You feel foolish and cruel and utterly, completely desperate. You wear the little bag with its grisly contents under your shirt. The dried amphibian, a constant, thumpy reminder of your hope. It does nothing, except, perhaps, make you smell faintly of pond scum. One morning, it happens, the largest lump, which had become soft and agonizingly tender, breaks. A thick, yellowish fluid weeps from and opens, or on your neck. The relief from the pressure is immense, but it's replaced by a new kind of horror. No, your disease isn't just a swelling, it's a wound. It's open. It smells. You have to keep it bandaged with scraps of linen that are quickly soiled. The social isolation is now absolute. You can't hide this. Historians still debate whether some of these folk remedies, particularly the herbal ones, held any real therapeutic value. Perhaps some mild antiseptic or anti-inflammatory properties lost to time. But for the vast majority of people like you, the result was the same: they didn't work. The journey through 17th century medicine has left you poorer, weaker, and more visibly afflicted than when you started. Every available door has been knocked on and found locked. The city, with its crowds and its commerce, has never felt so lonely. You sit in your room, the silence broken only by the drip of the London rain outside your window, and you stare at the stained bandage in your hand. This is it. This is the bottom. Just when the silence in your small room starts to feel like a shroud, a knock comes at the door. It's your neighbor, an elderly weaver named Arthur, a man whose face is a roadmap of a long, hard life. H.E.S. one of the few people who has completely shunned you. Offering a quiet nod instead of a hurried retreat, he carries a small loaf of bread, still warm, and his presence feels like the first glimmer of light you've seen in weeks. He doesn't mention the bandage on your neck, but he doesn't have to. The pity in his eyes is gentle, not accusatory. You sit in strained silence for a moment, the air heavy with Watson said. Then, he leans forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, even though you are the only two people in the room. You know, he begins, his gaze flicking towards the door as if to check for eavesdroppers. The barber surgeons and the apothecaries. They know nothing of this affliction. They are fumbling in the dark. You nod. The truth of his words a bitter taste in your mouth. But there is a cure, he says, his voice now barely audible. A true cure. A holy one. Your heart, which you thought had become a numb, heavy stone in your chest, gives a little flutter. You lean in, desperate to hear more. The king, Arthur whispers, the word full of reverence. His Majesty, the king, they say he has the gift, that God has placed a healing power in his hands, a power meant specifically for this. This evil. You've heard whispers of this before, of course. It's a story that floats around the city like smoke, a piece of folklore you never paid much mind to. But you always dismissed it as a tale for children, a fanciful myth. To hear it now, from a sensible old man, presented not as a story but as a fact, a tangible solution, it hits differently. This brings us to a crucial historical point. The belief in the royal touch was not some fringe conspiracy theory. For centuries, it was a deeply ingrained part of the social and political fabric in both England and France. It was accepted as truth by a huge portion of the population, from the poorest peasant to the well-to-do merchant. The idea was simple and powerful: the legitimate monarch was God's chosen representative on earth. Therefore, God had granted them a supernatural ability, a personal miracle they could perform to demonstrate their divine right to rule. And the one miracle they were most famous for was curing Scr of Eula, the king's evil. Arthur sees the skepticism warring with hope on your face. I'm not talking of rumor. He insists. My own cousin's boy, from Rochester, he was afflicted just as you are. Worse, even, his neck was a mess of sores. They took him to Whitehall. The king laid his hands on him, gave him a gold coin. He pauses for dramatic effect. Within a month, the sores began to close. Now, he's a healthy lad, strong as an ox. A story, just a story. But it's a story with a hook. And that hook is just snagged the last shred of hope you have. Here's a bizarre little tidbit for you. The tradition was so old and respected that it had its own official liturgy. The ceremony of the royal touch was part of the Anglican Book of Common Prayer. It wasn't just a folk belief, it was, for a time, sanctioned by the church. There were specific prayers and scripture readings that accompanied the ritual, framing the king not just as a head of state, but as an instrument of divine healing. You ask Arthur, your voice hoarse from disuse, how does one see the king? It is not easy, he admits. There are great crowds. You must travel to the palace to Whitehall. You must get a certificate. You must wait. But people do it every week. They line up, seeking the king's grace. The idea is insane. You, a nobody, covered in sores and stinking of sickness and despair, traveling to the king's own palace to stand before the monarch himself. It sounds like a fever dream. The king is an abstract figure, a name on proclamations, a face on coins. He isn't real in the way the cold floor beneath your feet is real. But the alternative is very, very real. The alternative is sitting in this room, waiting for the disease to consume you, waiting for your few remaining coins to run out, waiting to die alone and be buried in a pauper's grave. Historians continue to debate the exact origins of the royal touch. Some trace it back to the French King Robert II in the 11th century, while English tradition often credits Edward the Confessor. The two nations were, for a long time, in a sort of healing arms race, each claiming their monarch's touch was the original and most potent. But for you, sitting in this damp room, the academic details don't matter. What matters is the seed of a plan that is beginning to sprout in the barren ground of your despair. The king's touch. It's a crazy rumor. It's an impossible dream. It's a journey into the heart of power and spectacle. And right now, it's the only thing you have left. The waver leaves, and you are alone again. But the silence is different now. It's no longer the silence of the grave. It's the silence of contemplation. A mild, terrifying, and utterly irresistible idea taking root. The idea, once planted, grows with a startling, ferocious speed. The king's touch. Whitehall. Your. The words echo in your mind, drowning out the constant, dull ache in your neck. For the first time in months, you have a purpose beyond simply enduring the day. You have a destination. But a journey, even one born of desperation, requires resources. You take stock of your life. The room you went is bare, containing little more than a straw mattress, a rickety table, and a wooden chest. Your clothes are worn. Your coins are few. The journey to Whitehall isn't a trip across town, it's an expedition into a world you don't belong in. The King's Court is a galaxy away from your humble existence. The first thing to go is your father's old silver pocket watch. You've kept it for years. A heavy, silent reminder of a healthier, happier time. You take it to a pawnbroker, a man with eyes like a hawk, who examines it with feigned disinterest, points out every scratch and flaw, and offers you a pittance. You take it. The pang of loss is sharp, but the jingle of the coins in your hand is the sound of possibility. Next is the wooden chest itself. You sell it to your landlord for a few more shillings, piling your meager belongings in a corner of the now even emptier room. You are stripping your life down to its barest essentials, shedding your past for a chance at a future. Each transaction is a small heartbreak, a severing of ties with the person you used to be. But with each coin, the plan becomes more solid, more real. You buy a new, clean bandage for your neck, a small loaf of hard bread, and a piece of cheese. You pack them in a cloth satchel along with your few remaining possessions. You look at yourself in the small, cracked piece of mirror you own. The face that looks back is pale and thin, the eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, manic excitement. The swelling on your neck is a constant, ugly companion. But for the first time, you allow yourself to imagine a future where it's gone. This journey you're about to embark on was a very real pilgrimage for thousands upon thousands of people. This is a key historical point. Seeking the royal touch wasn't a casual affair. For many, especially those living outside of London, it was a significant undertaking, requiring them to leave their homes, their jobs, and their families for an uncertain period. They would travel for days or even weeks, often on foot, converging on the capital with a singular, desperate goal. It was a mass movement fueled by a combination of faith, folklore, and the complete failure of conventional medicine. You spend a sleepless night, your mind racing. You think about the king. What would he look like? Would he be disgusted by the sight of you? Would the guards even let someone like you near the palace? The stories say he is gracious, that he sees it as his sacred duty. But stories are one thing, reality another. Here's a curious detail: the pilgrims seeking the touch were a surprisingly diverse group. While many were poor and destitute, records show that people from the middle classes, and even the gentry, would sometimes seek the king's healing. The king's evil was an equal opportunity affliction, and if your local physician had failed you, the king was the ultimate specialist, regardless of your social standing. The line outside the palace was a great equalizer, a place where the desperate lord might stand a few feet from the desperate laborer. The next morning, you wake before dawn. The city is still quiet, wrapped in a grey mist. You tie your satchel, pull your cloak tight, and for the last time, you open the door to your small room. You don't look back. Walking through the empty streets feels different. You are no longer aimlessly wandering, you are heading somewhere. Your destination is Whitehall, the seat of power, the heart of the kingdom. The name itself sounds grand and imposing. You follow the river, using it as your guide. The air coming off the Thames is cool and damp. The journey is an assault on the senses. The further you get from your own familiar neighborhood, the more the city changes. You pass through areas of unimaginable poverty, where families live in lean-to shacks and the gutters run thick with filth. You also skirt the edges of wealthy districts, catching glimpses of grand houses with glass windows of rare luxury and private gardens. The contrast is jarring. The city holds both abject misery and opulent splendor, and you are a ghost walking between them. Historians often struggle to quantify the exact number of people who undertook this journey, as record-keeping was inconsistent. However, based on the records that do exist, particularly the accounts of the special coins minted for the occasion, the numbers are staggering. We're not talking about a few dozen people a year, we're talking about thousands. You are not just one person on a desperate quest, you are part of a massive, unorganized, and continuous pilgrimage. As the sun climbs higher, the city awakens, and you are swept up in the flow of humanity. You keep your head down, your hand instinctively covering your neck. You are just one more face in the crowd, anonymous and invisible. But you are moving. You are putting one foot in front of the other. You have sold your past and bought a ticket for a lottery. A holy gamble. Your pilgrimage has begun. As you draw closer to the area around Whitehall, the character of the crowd begins to shift. It's no longer just the usual city throng of merchants, neighbors, and messengers. You start to notice others who look like you, not in their faces or their clothes, but in their posture. They walk with a certain hesitation, a self-consciousness that you recognize immediately. They keep their collars pulled higher, a scarf wrapped just so. They have the same haunted, hopeful look in their eyes. You see a young woman leaning against a wall, her mother dabbing at her neck with a cloth. You see a stooped old man whose whole body seems twisted with a weary pain. You see a father holding the hand of a small child, a boy no older than 5 or 6, with a telltale bulge beneath his ear. You are not alone. You are an army of the afflicted. The sheer number of people is staggering. The closer you get to the palace complex, the more the streets are choked with them. They are everywhere. They sit on church steps. They huddle in alleyways. They form small, quiet groups, sharing scraps of food and stories told in hushed tones. The air hums with a collective, unspoken understanding. No one needs to ask why anyone else is here. Everyone knows. This brings us to a mind-boggling piece of historical data, which helps frame the scale of this phenomenon. King Charles II of England, who reigned from 1660 to 1685, was a particularly enthusiastic practitioner of the royal touch. It's recorded that over the course of his reign, he touched nearly 100 people, 100,000. That's an average of 4,000 to 5,000 people a year. On some days, especially around Easter, he would touch hundreds of people in a single ceremony. What you are witnessing is not a fringe event, it's a massive, state-sanctioned, and highly organized public health initiative, albeit one based entirely on superstition. You find a place to sit on the edge of a horse trough. The cold stone a welcome relief for your tired legs. You eat a piece of your hard bread, trying to be discreet. From your vantage point, you can watch the people. It's a cross-section of the entire kingdom's misery. You hear accents from the north, from the west country, from the marshlands of the east. These people have traveled far. They have staked everything on this one single chance. The scene is one of profound and public desperation. Yet, there's also a strange sense of community. A woman offers you a sip of water from her flask. A man gives you a piece of advice he overheard. They say the ceremonies will be held after the holiday. We must wait. There's a shared vulnerability that breaks down the usual social barriers. You are all members of the same unfortunate club. Here's a small, slightly macabre detail about this gathering for the City of London. This regular influx of sick people was a major problem. These crowds strained resources. They brought more disease with them than just scrofula. City officials were often at odds with the court, worried about hygiene, public order, and the potential for plague outbreaks that these gatherings of the sick might trigger. The divine cure was a logistical nightmare for the mundane reality of city governance. As the day wears on, you start to listen to the conversations around you. People are trading stories, not just of their sickness, but of the cure. The mythology of the royal touch is being built and reinforced in real time. One person claims to have met a man who was touched and whose sores vanished overnight. Another swears that the gold coin the king gives you a ward off evil spirits for the rest of your life. These stories ripple through the crowd, each retelling adding a new layer of miraculous detail. Hope is a contagious currency here, and it's being passed from person to person. The historical debate here isn't about whether this happened, it absolutely did, but about the psychology of the crowd. Was this mass hysteria a collective placebo effect, or was it a perfectly rational choice in a world with no other good options? Historians argue that when faced with a chronic, disfiguring disease that medicine could not fix, turning to the highest authority in the land, a man believed to be touched by God, wasn't irrational at all. It was the most logical Hail Mary pass imaginable. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the hopeful, weary faces. The crowd doesn't disperse. People find corners and doorways to curl up in for the night. The promise of the king's touch is so powerful that they are willing to sleep on the cobblestones, to endure cold and hunger, just to be near the place where the miracle is said to happen. You pull your cloak tighter, the hard reality of your situation setting in. You are one of them. You have made your pilgrimage. Now, all you can do is wait. And as you huddle against the cold stone, you realize this is the first of many nights you will spend like this, a hopeful refugee at the gates of a palace. Days blur into a monotonous cycle of waiting. You learn the rhythms of this strange, temporary community. You wake with the dawn, stiffened cold from sleeping on the unyielding ground. You share what little food you have, and others share with you. The main activity of the day is the gathering and trading of information or, more often, rumor. The Palace of Whitehall is not a single building but a sprawling complex, a city within a city, spreading over 23 acres. It's a chaotic jumble of grand halls, residential apartments, courtyards, and gardens, all nestled on the bank of the River Thames. From your position on the street, You can only see the imposing gates and the endless stone walls, patrolled by guards in striking red coats. The palace is a fortress, and you are on the outside looking in. The main topic of conversation is always the king, Charles II, to the people in the street. He is more than a man, he is a symbol. The older people in the crowd remember the time before him. The bleak years of the Commonwealth, when there was no king and, therefore, no royal touch. The restoration of the monarchy wasn't just a political event for the afflicted. It was the restoration of hope itself. This is a key historical context. Charles II's enthusiastic revival of the royal touch was a brilliant piece of political theatre. After years of civil war and Cromwell's Puritan rule, England had its merry monarch back by enthusiastically performing this ancient ritual. Charles wasn't just healing the sick, he was visually and powerfully re-establishing the sacred, divinely ordained nature of kingship. Each touch was a small act of propaganda, reinforcing the idea that the monarchy was natural, legitimate, and blessed by God, in stark contrast to the kingless decade that preceded him. You hear all sorts of stories about him. They called him the Merry Monarch. They say he loves women, horse racing, and science. They say he has dozens of illegitimate children. But they also say he is deeply pious and takes his duty to heal his subjects very seriously. A man who claims to be a palace servant, though he is probably just a braggart, tells a small, rapt audience that the king is often exhausted after the ceremonies, drained by the divine energy that flows through him. You listen to these tales, and they transform the abstract figure of the king into a character. You start to feel a strange sense of personal connection to this man you've never met. He is your potential savior. Your entire future rests in his hands, literally. Here's a curious, behind-the-scenes detail about the palace itself. While it was the grandest royal residence in England, Whitehall was also notoriously chaotic and, in places, rather shabby. The sprawling complex was a fire hazard, and diaries from the period, like those of Samuel Pepys, often complain about the strange mix of magnificence and squalor. While you imagine a pristine fortress of marble and gold, the reality was a bustling, often dirty, and overcrowded administrative center where the highest affairs of state happened just rooms away from kitchens and laundry facilities. The king you're waiting for might be discussing foreign policy one moment and then stepping into a courtyard to touch a few hundred sick people the next. One day, a wave of excitement triples through the crowd. A minor official, a clerk in a dark coat, appears at the gates. He doesn't make a grand announcement, but word spreads like wildfire from the front of the crowd to the back where you are standing. The king will hold a healing ceremony in 3 days' time. 3 days. The news electrifies the atmosphere. The weary resignation that had settled over the crowd is replaced by a palpable tension, a nervous energy. The waiting is no longer indefinite. There is a date. A real, tangible moment to focus on. But the official's announcement came with a condition, and this is the next hurdle in your journey. You cannot simply show up. You need a ticket, a certificate, a piece of paper that proves you are worthy of the king's time. The historical basis for this is well documented. To manage the overwhelming numbers and to weed out fraudsters who might try to get the valuable gold coin more than once, the court instituted a system of control. The king's own physicians and surgeons weren't tasked with examining the certificates. Only those they deemed genuinely afflicted with the king's evil would be given a signed certificate, which acted as a ticket for admission to the ceremony. The crowd begins to buzz with this new information. Where do we get these certificates? Who are these surgeons? Will there be enough to go around the long? Passive wait is over. No, a new, more frantic stage of your quest is about to begin. You have to get past the gatekeepers. You have to prove that your suffering is real. The announcement of the certificate requirement throws the crowd into a state of organized chaos. The communal waiting is replaced by a specific, individual goal. You need to get that piece of paper. It's no longer enough to be sick, you have to be officially certified as sick. Word spreads that the king's surgeons will hold their examinations at a specific location, perhaps a separate building near the palace, or even just a designated courtyard. A great, slow-moving river of people begins to flow in that direction. The mood is tense. There's a fear that the surgeons might be arbitrary, that they might run out of time, that you could get this far only to be turned away at the final administrative hurdle. You find yourself in another line, this one more formal and more nerve-wracking than any before. It snakes around a small courtyard, and at the end of it, sitting at a simple wooden table, are two men. They are not the ragged barber surgeons you are used to. These are the king's own men. They are dressed in fine, dark coats. They look stern, professional, and slightly bored, like men performing a repetitive and somewhat unpleasant task. This process is a key part of the historical record. The surgeons, men like Richard Wiseman, who was sergeant surgeon to Charles II, were highly respected medical practitioners of their day. They wrote textbooks and treatises on surgery. Their involvement lent the entire ceremony a veneer of medical legitimacy. It wasn't just folk magic, it was a process overseen by the top medical experts in the kingdom. Their job was to ensure the king wasn't wasting his divine gift on the wrong kind of sick person or on charlatans. As you wait, you watch the process ahead of you. Each person steps up to the table. They pull down their collar or lift their scarf. One of the surgeons leans in, sometimes probing the afflicted area with a single, gloved finger. He looks for the characteristic signs: the hard, glandular swellings, the chain of lumps, the open, weeping sores, or the scars from old ones. There is a brief, murmured conversation. Then, the surgeon either takes a pre-written certificate, dips a quill in ink, and signs it with a flourish, or he shakes his head and waves the person away. Each dismissal sends a ripple of fear through the line. You see a man argue, gesticulating wildly, before being firmly escorted away by a guard. You see a woman burst into tears, her hope crumbling in a single moment. Your own heart pounds in your chest. What if they decide you are not sick enough or too sick? What if they mistake your desperation for deception? Finally, it's your turn. You step forward, your knees feeling weak. Your hands tremble as you unwrap the bandage from your neck. The cool air hits the raw, open sore, and you flinch. You feel a wave of shame as you expose the most hideous part of yourself to these impassive strangers. The surgeon, a man with tired eyes and a graying mustache, leans in. He doesn't look at your face, only at your neck. His gaze is clinical, detached. He sees not a person, but a specimen. He notes the swelling, the discoloration, the open lesion. He says nothing to you, but turns to his colleague and mutters a few words in Latin, the universal language of medicine and scholarship, designed to be incomprehensible to the patient. And here's a funny, slightly cynical detail from the period while the surgeons were there to diagnose scrofula. Their own medical texts often expressed a degree of skepticism about the royal touch itself. Richard Wiseman, for example, wrote extensively about his own surgical treatments for scrofula, which involved lancing the sores and applying various medicines. He diplomatically praised the king's healing gift in public, but seemed to trust his own scalpels and potions in private. Historians are still divided on what these surgeons truly believe. Were they pious men facilitating a miracle? Or were they pragmatic state employees carrying out a required duty, rolling their eyes on the inside? The surgeon straightens up. He picks up a small, printed card. You hold your breath. With a scratch of his quill, he signs his name at the bottom and pushes it across the table towards you. Relief washes over you so intensely that you feel lightheaded. You snatch the paper, mumbling a thank you that comes out as a croak. You don't even dare to look at it closely until you are several steps away. It is a small, stiff card. It bears a printed message, something about the bearer having been duly examined. And at the bottom, the incomprehensible but powerful scrawl of the surgeon's signature. This piece of paper is the most valuable thing you have ever owned. It is more precious than your father's watch, more valuable than your home. It is a key. You clutch it in your hand, shielding it from the jostling crowd as if it were a fragile bird. You have been seeing You have been judged, and you have been found worthy. You have passed the test. Now, all that remains is to meet the king. Clutching your precious certificate, you feel a renewed sense of purpose. The waiting is no longer a passive state of being, it's an official, sanctioned period of anticipation. You and the other certified individuals from a new, more elite group within the crowd of the afflicted. You have your golden tickets. In the final day or two before the ceremony, the atmosphere around the palace gates becomes thick with discussion, not about the sickness, but about the cure itself. Why does it work? How did the king get this power? People who seemed like simple farmers or laborers a few days ago now engage in deep theological and political debates, piecing together a worldview that makes sense of their incredible situation. It's here that you, for the first time, really start to absorb the core political theory of the age, the divine right of kings. An older man, a former soldier with a straight back and a clear voice, explains it to a small group of you as you huddle for warmth. It is not the man, he says, gesturing vaguely towards the palace walls. It is the office. God himself anoints the rightful king of England. He is not chosen by Parliament or by the rabble. He is chosen by the Almighty. This healing touch is the proof. It is God's own seal upon him, a sign for all to see that he is the legitimate ruler. This is the central historical concept underpinning the entire ritual. The theory of divine right, most passionately articulated by thinkers like Sir Robert Filmer and even King James I himself, Charles II's grandfather, posited that a monarch is subject to no earthly authority, deriving the right to rule directly from the will of God. The king was, therefore, not merely a head of state but a little god on earth. God's lieutenant. It was an incredibly powerful justification for absolute monarchy. A perfect ideological defense against rebellion or revolution. The old soldier's words sink in. This ceremony isn't just about you and your neck. It's about proving something much, much bigger. The king isn't just doing you a favor, HES performing a public demonstration of his God-given authority. Your sickness, your suffering, has a part to play in the grand theater of state power. You are not just a patient, you are evidence. Someone else chimes in. A woman who says her brother is a clerk. That's why the usurper, Cromwell, could never perform the cure. He ruled, but he was not a king. The gift was absent from the land for all those years. Her words are met with murmurs of agreement. The absence of the royal touch during the interregnum 1649-1660 was seen by royalists as proof of the illegitimacy of the republican government. The return of the king meant the return of the magic. And here's a wonderfully weird historical fact: the belief was so tied to legitimacy that it was thought only the rightful king could perform the cure. If a pretender to the throne tried, it wouldn't work. This made the touch a potent political weapon, especially in times of disputed succession. Claiming you could perform the touch was akin to claiming you were the rightful king. You begin to see the world through this new lens. The order of the universe suddenly seems clearer. God is in heaven, the king is on his throne, and the king's power flows from God. Your disease, the king's evil, is a disruption in this natural order, a small pocket of chaos. The king's touch is the act of restoring the divine order, smoothing out the wrinkle in the fabric of God's creation that has manifested on your neck. It's a powerful, comforting, and all-encompassing explanation. It gives your personal misery a cosmic significance. Historians still debate how sincerely the monarchs themselves believed in their own divine power. Did Charles II, a man known for his scientific curiosity and worldly cynicism, genuinely think he was a conduit for God's healing grace, or did he, a shrewd political operator, simply understand the immense public relations value of the ceremony? Some accounts suggest he found the ritual tiresome but recognized its importance. Others portray him as genuinely pious. The truth is likely somewhere in the complex middle. He was a man of his time, a transitional figure with one foot in the age of faith and the other stepping into the age of reason. As you sit there, listening to the theories and stories, the certificate in your pocket feels heavier. It's not just a pass to get medical treatment. It's an invitation to participate in a sacred political sacrament. You are about to become a living testament to the divine right of kings. The thought is both terrifying and exhilarating. You came here seeking a cure for your body, but you have stumbled into a lesson about the very soul of the kingdom. As you huddle with your fellow supplicates, waiting for the great day, the conversation inevitably drifts to other places and other kings. An older sailor, a man who has traveled and seen more of the world than most, shares a fascinating piece of information. It's not just our king, you know, he says, his voice raspy from sea salt and cheap gin. The French king, he does it too. Been doing it for even longer than ours, they say. This revelation sparks a wave of discussion. The idea that another king possesses the same divine gift is both intriguing and slightly troubling. It complicates the clean narrative of your own monarch's unique, God-given power. The sailor's comment introduces you to a major historical fact: the long-standing rivalry between the English and French monarchies over the royal touch. For centuries, the kings of England and France were the only two monarchs in Europe who claimed this specific healing ability. This shared, yet exclusive, miracle became a point of national pride and intense competition. Each court's propagandists and historians worked tirelessly to prove that their royal line had the original, and therefore more authentic, healing gift. The sailor, warming to his role as the group's expert, elaborates. They say the French started it, but I've heard our own scholars say that their kings learned it from ours, back when we owned half of France. This is a perfect encapsulation of the patriotic arguments of the time. English accounts often trace the tradition back to Edward the Confessor in the 11th century. French accounts, meanwhile, insisted their tradition began even earlier, with kings like Robert II or even Clovis I, the first Christian king of the Franks. The rivalry was just academic, it was deeply political. At times when England and France were at war, which was often, the efficacy of the royal touch became a form of propaganda. A victory on the battlefield could be seen as proof of God's favor, which in turn validated the king's sacred power, including his ability to heal. A French courtier might sniff that the English king's touch was a pale imitation, while an English pamphleteer would declare the French king a charlatan whose supposed cures were nothing but Catholic superstition. And here's a fantastic, quirky little detail that highlights the competition. The mottos used in the ceremony differed. The English ceremony often revolved around the idea of the king touching the person, with the healing coming directly from him as God's vessel. The French ceremony, on the other hand, evolved to a phrase that translated to "the king touches you. May God heal you right ditus," wishing you a pleasant experience. This subtle difference became a point of contention. The English could argue that this proved the French king's power was weaker, he had to ask God for the favor, whereas the English king's touch was the favor. The French, in turn, could argue their formula was more pious, giving the ultimate credit to God rather than arrogantly claiming the power for the man himself. This information fascinates you. The world suddenly seems larger and more complex. Your very English disease, the king's evil, is apparently also a French disease. Your very English cure has a French counterpart. It adds a layer of geopolitical drama to your personal quest for health. The discussion then turns to which king is better at it. The sailor, a loyal Englishman, scoffs at the idea that the French king could be as effective. Our king is the true head of the Church of England. The Frenchie is just a papist. God wouldn't give his best miracles to a man who answers to the Pope in Rome. Now would he? This sentiment is met with vigorous nods of approval from the group. In the deeply sectarian world of 17th century Europe, even a medical cure was viewed through the lens of the Protestant-Catholic divide. Historians are still untangling the parallel evolution of this ritual in the two countries. It seems likely that the tradition developed in both kingdoms, influencing each other over the centuries through royal marriages, political exchange, and simple cross-channel gossip. The rivalry was less about a single, verifiable origin and more about two powerful monarchies, using the same supernatural tool to bolster their legitimacy. For them, It was just about healing the sick, it was about spiritual one-upmanship. Thinking about the French king, across the water, laying his hands on people just like you, is a strange thought. It makes the miracle feel slightly less special. But it also, in a weird way, makes it feel more real. If two different kings, Adam is Eve, both have this power, then the power itself must be real, mustn't it? It's not just a local linguist superstition, it's an international phenomenon. This realization, paradoxically, strengthens your resolve. You're in the right place, waiting for the right king, the original and best. You tell yourself, the English version. The day of the ceremony finally arrives. The air is electric. You and the others with certificates are separated from the rest of the crowd and herded by guards into one of the courtyards of Whitehall. The space is grander than anything you've ever seen, surrounded by tall, elegant buildings with countless glass windows that glitter in the morning light. As you wait, the name on every owner's lips is the King's Charles. Charles II, the man who was brought back from exile to restore the throne, the man who survived the plotting of his enemies, the man they call the Merry Monarch. The stories you've heard on the street now coalesce into a single, complex image of the man you are about to meet. A well-dressed man standing near you, perhaps a minor courtier or the servant of a nobleman, begins to speak about the king, and you listen intently. He doesn't just talk about the king's divine power, he talks about the man himself. You are fortunate, the man says, smoothing his lace scarf. King Charles performs the ceremony with more enthusiasm than his father ever did. He understands its importance. He has touched more people in his reign than any three kings before him combined. This is the central historical fact about Charles II and the royal touch. He was its most prolific practitioner. His father, Charles I, had performed the ritual, as had James I before him. But Charles I turned it into a cornerstone of his reign, having spent his formative years in exile. Dependent on the charity of foreign courts, he understood the precarious nature of power. Upon his restoration to the throne in 1660, he embraced the royal touch with gusto. It was a powerful tool to reconnect the monarchy with the people and to physically demonstrate his restored, God-given status after the kingless years of the Commonwealth. The courtier continues, lowering his voice slightly. They say he enjoys it. The Merry Monarch, they call him. He likes the public spectacle, the adoration of the crowds. And, he adds with a wink, it does no harm for his people to see him as a holy man, though it distracts from his other hobbies. This hints at the complex personality of the king. Charles I was a man of enormous contradictions. He was intelligent, charming, and possessed a deep interest in science. He founded the Royal Society. He was also famously hedonistic, with a string of high-profile mistresses and a court renowned for its licenses and extravagance. He was both the patron of science and the nation's chief magical healer. He was a symbol of divine authority and a man known for his very earthly appetites. Here's a fantastic tidbit that captures this contradiction perfectly. Samuel Pepys, the famous dysert, recorded an occasion where he saw the king at the healing ceremony. In his diary entry for April 13, Pepys described seeing Charles I stroking the faces of the sick with two chaplains kneeling beside him. Immediately after, Pepys follows the king out into the park to watch him play with his dogs and flirt with his mistress, Gabriel Plummer. This casual juxtaposition of sacred duty and personal pleasure is the very essence of the Merry Monarch. The courtier's stories paint a picture of a king who is approachable, even relatable, despite his divine status. You hear that he is often patient and kind during the ceremonies, sometimes speaking a gentle word to the children who are brought before him. This humanizes him. The abstract symbol of power you've been contemplating is about to become a real person, a charming, short, powerful, and potentially miraculous person. The debate among historians about Charles I's personal beliefs rages on. Was he a true believer in the royal touch, a cynical pragmatist, tame and compartmentalizing his faith and his reason? We can't know for sure what was in his heart, but we can judge his actions. and his actions show a king who, for whatever reason, committed himself to this ritual on an unprecedented scale. He made it a regular, almost routine part of his court's calendar, a massive undertaking that defined his relationship with his subjects. The gates at the far end of the courtyard swing open. A hush falls over your group. Royal guards march in, their boots striking the flagstones in perfect rhythm. They form a corridor, a pathway leading from the palace door to a raised platform at the center of the courtyard. This is it. The stage is being set. The ceremony is about to begin. Your heart is hammering against your ribs. You are about to see the merry monarch, your savior, in the flesh. The anticipation in the courtyard is so thick you could cut it with a knife. You are arranged in a long, kneeling line by stern-faced officials. The position is uncomfortable on the hard stone, but no one complains. Your discomfort is a small price to pay for what is about to happen. Then, he appears. King Charles II emerges from the palace door, and a collective gasp ripples through the kneeling crowd. He is not just a man, he is a spectacle. He is tall and dark, with a long, expressive face framed by a cascade of black curls from his wig. He is dressed in velvets on silks that shimmer in the sunlight, jewels glittering on his fingers and at his throat. He is surrounded by an entourage of courtiers, officials, and 2 chaplains in their solemn black robes. The scene is a study in brutal contrast. On one side, you have the pinnacle of earthly power and wealth, a vision of opulent splendor. On the other side, you have the kneeling line of the afflicted at a blow of human misery, cloaked in rags, marked by disease, and reeking of poverty and desperation. The healthy and the sick, the powerful and the powerless, the pristine and the purulent, all gathered in one place. It is a moment of pure, surreal, historical theater. This contrast was, of course, the entire point. This is a core aspect of the ritual's power. The king's magnificence wasn't an accident, it was a necessary part of the cure. His visible, overwhelming superiority was a physical representation of his divine favor. For the touch to be effective, he had to appear otherworldly, set apart from the grime and suffering of normal human existence. He was the bridge between your wretched state and God's grace, and he had to look the part. The ceremony begins. One of the chaplains steps forward and begins to read from the Book of Common Prayer, his voice clear and sonorous, echoing across the courtyard. The prayers are specifically chosen for the occasion, filled with references to Jesus healing the sick and the power of faith. The Latin phrases and the solemnity of the delivery create a powerful sense of sanctity. This isn't just a king meeting his subjects, it's a religious service. You watch, mesmerized, as the king approaches the first person in line. The ritual is precise and unhurried. The king dips his fingers in a silver bowl of water held by an attendant, then dries them on a fine linen towel. He steps up to the kneeling person. He gently takes their head in his hands and, with his thumb, he touches the swollen glands on their neck, pressing lightly on the sores. As he does so, he recites the words of the prayer. Then comes the second part of the ritual. After the touch, an official steps forward with a velvet tray. On it are gold coins, each threaded onto a white silk ribbon. The king takes one and drapes it around the person's neck. This is the touch piece. Here's a fascinating intangible piece of historical trivia. These coins were not regular currency. They were special gold coins called angels. They were so named because they featured an image of the archangel Michael slaying a dragon. These coins had been out of general circulation for some time but were minted specifically for the healing ceremony. They were a physical token of the royal touch, a souvenir of the miracle. The recipient was expected to wear it at all times. It was believed that as long as you wore the angel, the disease would not return. Losing the coin was considered a terrible omen. You watch as the king moves down the line, person after person. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't show any sign of disgust as he touches open, weeping sores. His expression is one of serene concentration. Whether it is an act of genuine piety or a masterful performance, the effect is the same. It is profoundly moving. He is treating the untouchable with dignity, anointing them with his royal grace. The line moves slowly forward. With each person, your turn gets closer. Your heart pounds. Your palms are sweating. You try to remember the instructions you were given. Kneel. Do not speak unless spoken to. Receive the coin, and move away. The sheer sensory overload of the moment is overwhelming. The smell of incense mingling with the faint, sick-room smell of the crowd. The sight of the king's jeweled fingers against the pale, diseased skin of the person in front of you. The sound of the chaplain's voice droning on. A constant river of sacred words. Historians often debate the psychological impact of such a powerful ceremony on the sick. In an age of faith, being the focus of such an intense, multi-sensory, and high-status ritual would have been an overwhelming experience. It's the ultimate form of the placebo effect. You are being told by the highest authority in the land, in the most dramatic way possible, that you are going to be healed. For some, the sheer belief in the flood of emotion might have been enough to trigger a genuine physiological response, perhaps boosting the immune system. Now, the person in front of you is being touched. The king's hands are just feet away from you. You close your eyes for a second, saying a desperate, silent prayer. This is the moment your entire journey has been leading up to. It's your turn. You are kneeling on the cold stone, your head bowed. You hear the rustle of silken velvet as the king and his entourage move in front of you. You don't dare to look up at his face. Instead, your eyes are fixed on the hem of his magnificent coat, the intricate gold thread catching the light. You feel a presence before you, and a shadow falls over you. A pair of elegant shoes, adorned with silver buckles, enters your field of vision. The chaplain's voice seems to grow louder, focusing the energy of the moment directly onto you. You can smell a faint, pleasant scent of perfume and pomade, a world away from the smells of sickness and poverty you are used to. Then, you feel it. The king's fingers, cool and surprisingly gentle, touch the side of your neck. His thumb presses directly onto the swollen, painful area, and then moves to the open sore. It is not a fleeting touch. He holds his hand there for a few seconds. In that moment, the world seems to stop. The noise of the courtyard, the pain in your neck, the ache in your knees, it all fades away. There is only this touch. It doesn't feel magical. It doesn't burn or tingle. It's just the pressure of a man's hand. But it's the king's hand. And in your mind, that makes all the difference. You feel a profound sense of calm wash over you. It's a feeling of release, as if a heavy burden you've been carrying for months has finally been lifted. You have done it. You have reached the end of your pilgrimage. You have received the grace you sought. As the king removes his hand, an official immediately steps forward. You look up slightly and see it, the glint of gold. The king takes the coin, threaded on its white ribbon, and drapes it over your head. The coin comes to rest on your chest, cool against your skin through your thin shirt. It feels impossibly heavy, a weight of significance, not of metal. This coin, the angel, is now the focus of your entire world. This is the key historical object of our story. These touch pieces are not just artifacts of a strange ritual, they are a direct link to the past. Thousands of them have survived and can be found in museums and private collections today. They are tangible proof of this widespread practice. Each one represents a story like yours, a story of sickness, desperation, a long journey, and a moment of hope in the presence of a king. You are gently prompted to your feet by a guard and guided away from the center of the courtyard to a designated area with the others who have already been touched. You stumble away, your legs unsteady, your mind in a daze. You can't stop looking down at the coin. You touch it with your fingertips. The image of the Archangel Michael is finely detailed. It feels solid, real. It is your proof. It is your prescription. Here's a small, fascinating detail about these coins: they were often bent. After receiving the coin, many people would have it bent or bowed. The reason for this is a subject of some historical debate. Some believe it was done to mark the coin as a sacred object. distinguishing it from currency and preventing it from being spent. Others suggest it was a way of activating its protective power, or perhaps a personal act of piety, a way of sealing the vow made during the healing. Many of the surviving touch pieces from this period are found in this bent state. You look around at the others who have been touched. Their faces are a mixture of awe, relief, and exhaustion. They, too, are clutching their new golden talismans. A woman is weeping silently, her face streaked with tears of joy. A man is staring at his coin as if it holds the secrets of the universe. The ceremony continues behind you, a well-oiled machine of miracle and monarchy. The king continues his slow, patient progress down the line. You realize the immense physical stamina it must require to touch hundreds of sick people, one by one, with such focused solemnity. Is a demanding performance. You have your angel. You have received the royal touch. The world outside the palace walls, with its grime and its cruelty, seems very far away. In this moment, inside this sacred bubble, you are safe. You have been seen by the king, touched by God's chosen, and given a piece of gold to prove it. Now, all that's left is for the magic to work. The ceremony concludes. The king, with a final, regal nod to the assembled group, turns and sweeps back into the palace, his entourage trailing behind him like the tail of a comet. The great doors close, and just like that, the magic is gone. The courtyard transforms back into a simple stone enclosure. The guards begin to chiv you and the others towards the gates, their tone once again impatient and impersonal. The bubble has burst. You are pushed back out into the teeming London streets, back into the world of noise and dirt. But you are not the same person who walked in. You clutch the angel coin hanging around your neck, its metallic reality a constant anchor to the incredible event you just experienced. The world around you looks the same, but you feel different. You feel anointed. As you walk away from Whitehall, you are floating on a cloud of euphoria and hope. The ache in your neck seems to have subsided. Is it your imagination, or is the cure already beginning to work? You dare to press a finger against the swelling. It feels softer, less angry, probably just your imagination, but you cling to the sensation. This feeling of immediate improvement is a classic element of faith healing accounts, both historical and modern. This is where the power of the mind over the body becomes a central theme. The immense psychological impact of the ceremony, the build-up, the spectacle, the reverence, the physical contact with a figure of ultimate authority could create a powerful psychosomatic response. The brain, flooded with endorphins and hope, can temporarily block pain signals and create a genuine feeling of well-being. For you, this feeling is indistinguishable from the beginning of a miracle. You find a quiet corner in a churchyard to sit and gather your thoughts. You take out the coin again, examining it in the daylight. It's a beautiful object. You decide, right then and there, that you will follow the tradition. You will have it bent. You ask around and are directed to a silversmith who, for a small fee, performs this service regularly. He places your coin on his anvil and, with a single, expert tap of his hammer, puts a slight curve in it. Now it is officially no longer a coin, it is an amulet. Your amulet. You begin the long journey home. The walk back through the city feels entirely different. You are no longer a pariah, a mocked man trying to hide his affliction. You walk with your head held a little higher. You have the king's gold around your neck. It feels like a shield. When you catch people looking at you, you no longer assume it with disgust. Perhaps they are looking at your angel, recognizing you as one of the chosen, one of the blessed. Here's a curious little social detail: possessing a touch piece could actually elevate a person's status within their community. It was visible proof that you had been in the presence of the king. It made you special. In a society with rigid social hierarchies, this was a unique experience for a commoner. You could dine out on the story for the rest of your life, describing the king's velvet coat, the gentleness of his touch, the solemnity of the prayers. You had a direct, personal experience of the divine order of the kingdom, and that gave you a certain standing. However, As the initial euphoria of the day begins to fade, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, tries to creep into your mind. What if it doesn't work? What if, a week from now, the swelling is the same? Or even worse, the entire weight of your future rests on this single, fragile hope. The journey, the expense, the waiting, it was all a gamble. You have placed your bet. Now you have to wait for the wheel to stop spinning. Historians who studied the royal touch are fascinated by this post-ceremony period. What happened to the tens of thousands of people, like you, who walked away with their gold angels? The historical record, written by court propagandists, is full of success stories, of miraculous overnight cures. But reality was likely much more complicated. The medical reality is that scrofula, being a form of tuberculosis, could sometimes go into spontaneous remission. The lumps could shrink, and the sores could heal on their own, especially if the person's overall health and nutrition improved. So if your condition did improve in the following weeks or months, would it be the king's touch, a natural remission, the result of the hope and positive mindset the ceremony gave you, or simply a coincidence to you? Of course, the answer would be obvious. It would be the king. This is the unresolvable historical question: how many of the cures were miracles? How many were misdiagnoses? How many were remissions? And how many were the powerful effect of a mind convinced it would be healed? As you reach your own neighborhood, the familiar sights and smells ground you. You are back in your world, but carrying a secret from another. You touch the bent coin on your chest one last time before tucking it securely beneath your shirt. The journey is over. The waiting has begun. Time passes. Weeks. Then months. You wear the bent angel coin religiously, never taking it off. It becomes a part of you. Its cool weight, a constant reminder of the king's promise. Every morning, the first thing you do is check the swellings on your neck. You become a meticulous observer of your own body, searching for any sign, any subtle change that might signal the miracle is unfolding. Some days you feel a surge of optimism. The main source seems to be weeping less, and the skin around it looks less angry. On these days, your heart soars. It's working. The king's grace is flowing through you, slowly, patiently, restoring you to health. You tell your neighbor, Arthur, the weaver who first gave you the idea, and he nods sagely, as if this was the only possible outcome. Other days, you fall into despair. A new lump seems to appear, while the old ones feel more tender. On these days, the gold coin feels like a fraud, a heavy, useless piece of metal. You wonder if your faith was not strong enough. The prayers at the ceremony said the healing was for the truly faithful. Perhaps there is some dark spot on your soul that is blocking the cure. The hope you brought back from Whitehall is a flickering candle, easily threatened by the winds of doubt. Your experience is a microcosm of what happened to the royal touch over the next few decades. The practice didn't end with the merry monarch. It continued, but the context began to change. This brings us to the next important historical figure in our story, Queen Anne. Decades have passed since your visit to Whitehall. You are older now. Your scrofula has become a chronic condition, sometimes better, sometimes worse. A constant companion. The monarchy has gone through turmoil. Charles I died without a legitimate heir. His Catholic brother, James II, was overthrown in the Glorious Revolution. William and Mary took the throne, followed by Anne. It's now the early 18th century. You hear stories of Queen Anne, the last Stuart monarch. She's a woman plagued by her own ill health and personal tragedies, and she clings to the traditions of her ancestors. She, too, performs the royal touch, but for her, the ritual has taken on a new and desperate significance. Her claim to the throne is seen by some as weaker than that of her male predecessors. For Anne, performing the touch is not just a routine duty, it's a vital way of proving she is a legitimate, God-appointed Stuart monarch, just like her uncles and grandfather before her. The ceremony becomes a key piece of her political branding. One of the most famous people Anne ever touched was a young boy named Samuel Johnson. who would grow up to become the great writer and lexicographer, the creator of the first comprehensive dictionary of the English language. This is a brilliant, verifiable historical fact. As a small child, Johnson was afflicted with scrofula. On the advice of a physician, his parents took him from their home and lifted all the way to London to be touched by the Queen in 1712. Johnson, later in life, could still vaguely remember the experience. He recalls a lady in a black hood and diamonds. The touch, however, did not cure him. He was left with the scars of the disease and partial blindness for the rest of his life. Yet, he kept the touch piece, the angel coin given to him by Queen Anne, for his entire life as a treasured memento. His story is perhaps the most well-documented case of the royal touch's failure. Yet it also is the immense cultural power the ritual still held. Here's a curious detail about Anne's ceremony because she was a woman, and a famously modest and pious one at that. There was some debate about the propriety of her touching her subjects so intimately. Adjustments were made. The ceremony became more formal, more distant. The focus was less on the personal, charismatic touch of the monarch and more on the religious gravity of the prayers. The magic was becoming institutionalized, a little more sterile. You, now an old man, hear these stories about Queen Anne and her ceremony. You touch the bent, worn angel coin that still hangs around your neck. The gold is soft. The image of the archangel smoothed down from decades of wear. It did not provide the instantaneous, miraculous cure you had dreamed of as a young man. The king's evil never truly left you. But did it fail you were still alive? You have survived. Many others with the disease died young. Did the coin, the memory, the hope, give you a psychological strength to endure? Did the king's touch, in some strange, unconscious build way, actually work, just not in the way you expected? This is the nuanced historical perspective that many scholars now take. The royal touch was not a simple transaction of touch cure. It was a complex psychological, social, and political phenomenon for someone like Samuel Johnson. It was a failure as a medical procedure but a success as a memorable and significant life event. For you, it has been a lifelong companion, a source of flickering hope in dark times, a tangible link to a moment of supreme importance. It failed to cure your body, but perhaps it did something for your soul. Queen Anne's touch may have been the last gasp of the tradition, but its legacy, like the coin around your neck, endures. As you get older, living with the ebb and flow of your chronic condition, you become more observant of the world around you, especially the world of medicine. You've outlived the merry monarch and his brother, seen Queen Anne come and go. The world is changing, and so are the people who practice healing. You start to notice a new kind of conversation, spoken in hushed tones not by the superstitious, but by the learned. You overhear them sometimes in coffee houses, which are becoming the new centers of debate and news. You see them gathering, these men of science and medicine, with their books and pamphlets. And when they speak of the king's evil, they don't always speak of the king's touch. One afternoon, you are sitting near a group of these men. One of them is a young physician, his face animated with passion and new ideas. He is talking to his older colleagues, his voice slow but insistent. To rely on the royal hand, he says, is to abdicate our own responsibility. It is a superstition, a relic of a darker age. We are men of reason, of observation. We should be looking for causes in the material world, not for cures in the realm of ceremony. An older physician scoffs. Be careful, young man. You speak of a sacred tradition. You question the king's own gift. That is a dangerous road. I question what I see with my own eyes, the young man counters. I have seen a dozen patients return from Whitehall with their gold angels. Some improve, yes, but others they languish. They perish. The coin around their neck does nothing to halt the putrefaction of their flesh. There is no pattern, no consistency. If it were a true, divine cure, would it not work for all the faithful? Would it be so unreliable? This conversation you're eavesdropping on represents a major turning point in our story, the growing professional skepticism towards the royal touch among the medical community. While surgeons like Richard Wiseman in Charles I's time had to publicly support the ritual, by the early 18th century, a new generation of physicians and surgeons was beginning to find its voice. The influence of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment was starting to trickle down, encouraging a more empirical, evidence-based approach to medicine. For these forward-thinking doctors, the royal touch was becoming an embarrassment. It was a piece of medieval folklore that stood in the way of genuine medical progress. They saw that relying on a magical cure prevented patients from seeking out the admittedly still limited practical treatments that physicians could offer, like better diet, cleaner living conditions, or surgical lancing of abscesses. The king's touch wasn't just ineffective. In their view, it was actively harmful because it gave people false hope and discouraged the search for real cures. Here's a fascinating, specific detail. We have medical texts from this period where doctors start to subtly write around the royal touch. They would write entire chapters on the treatment of SC or of EULA, detailing various poultices, diets, and surgical procedures. And then, almost as an obligatory footnote, they would add a sentence like, "Of course, the touch of the monarch is the highest and most sacred remedy for this affliction." It's a classic case of covering your bases, paying lip service to the official state-sponsored miracle while dedicating the bulk of your professional effort to finding something that actually worked. The young physician in the coffee house is getting more animated. "Think of it," he says, leaning in. "We look for the cure in the king's hand, but perhaps we should be looking at the sea. I have read accounts of sailors on long voyages, their SC or of EULA improving with access to certain foods. Or what about the air? We know that the air in the countryside is cleaner than London's foul miasma." He is grasping at straws, of course confusing SC or of EULA with scurvy, speculating about miasma, but the crucial shift is in where he is looking for answers in the natural world, not the supernatural one. The older doctor shakes his head. "It is a matter of faith." "No," the young man insists. "It is a matter of anatomy. It is a matter of chemistry. It is a matter of things we do not yet understand, but which we can understand, if only we dare to look." Listening to this, you feel a strange mix of emotions. Your hand instinctively goes to the worn angel coin under your shirt. For your entire adult life, this coin and the memory it represents have been your anchor. The idea that it is all just a superstition feels like a personal attack. It invalidates your journey, your hope, your survival. And yet, the young doctor's words have a dangerous, compelling logic. You have seen people with the coin who did not get better. You yourself have lived a life of waxing and waning sickness, not a clean cure. The historical debate here centers on when the tide of elite opinion truly turned. It wasn't a single event, but a slow erosion. With each passing decade of the 18th century, as scientific knowledge grew, the belief in the royal touch receded from the circles of the educated and the powerful, eventually becoming seen as a quaint folk belief, a relic of a more credulous time. You are witnessing the beginning of that very erosion, the first cracks appearing in a belief system that had stood for 700 years. The doctor's quiet, subversive whispers are the sound of a world beginning to change. You leave the coffee house with the young doctor's words ringing in your ears as superstition, a relic of a darker age. You walk home through streets that are slowly changing. The city is growing. The buildings are getting taller, and there's a new energy in the air, a hum of commerce and discovery. The world doesn't feel like a darker age. It feels like it's waking up. You return to your small room, a place that has been the silent witness to your long struggle. You sit on your bed and, for the first time in a long time, you take the angel coin off from around your neck. The ribbon is frayed and stained with decades of sweat. The coin itself is smooth, its details worn away by constant contact with your skin. You hold it in your palm. This small piece of gold has been the central object of your adult life. It has been your hope, your comfort, your story. You think back to that day at Whitehall, the pageantry, the kneeling, the king's gentle touch. The memory is still vivid, still powerful. You remember the absolute certainty you felt, the unshakable belief that you were being cured. And then you think of the long years since, the good months, when the swelling would go down and you felt almost healthy. The bad months, when a new sore would erupt, bringing with it fever and pain. Your life after the touch has not been a clear, straight line to recovery. It has been a jagged, unpredictable path. This is the reality for most people who sought the cure. This is a crucial historical point. The narrative of the royal touch is dominated by the ceremony itself, but the real story lies in the long, unrecorded aftermath. The official propaganda, the pamphlets and royal proclamations, focused on the successes, but they were silent about the failures, the relapses, and the chronic, grinding reality of the disease for the majority of sufferers. You look at the scars on your neck in your small, cracked mirror. They are a permanent map of your illness. The touch did not erase them. The coin did not prevent them. And yet, you survived. You are an old man now. Arthur the Weaver is long gone. The merry monarch is a figure from history books. But you are still here. This forces you to confront a difficult question: what role did the touch really play? Here's an interesting and somewhat counterintuitive thought from modern psychology that we can apply here sometimes. The most important function of a belief is not that it's true, but that it's useful for you. The belief in the king's touch gave you a reason to live. It gave you a goal, the pilgrimage to London. It gave you a sense of agency in a situation where you were otherwise helpless. It gave you a powerful symbol of hope, the coin to cling to during the darkest times. It refrained your suffering from a random, meaningless affliction into a trial of faith with the potential for a divine reward. In short, the ritual gave you a story to live inside of, and that story may have been the most powerful medicine of all. As you sit there, holding the coin, you begin to see it not as a magical object, but as something else, a souvenir, a memento of the most extraordinary day of your life. You think of the young, desperate person you were, selling all your possessions for a chance at a miracle. You feel a great wave of empathy for him. The historical debate over the royal touch often gets framed as a simple binary: was it real or was it fake? But your life story suggests a more nuanced answer. The magic may not have been in the king's fingers, but in the hope the ritual created. The cure may not have been divine, but the psychological boost it provided might have been just enough to help your body's own defenses fight a little harder, to help your mind endure a little longer. You slip the ribbon back over your head. The coin settles into its familiar place against your chest. It feels different now, less like a sacred amulet, and more like an old friend. It no longer represents a promise of a perfect cure, but a testament to your own resilience. It is a symbol not of the king's power, but of your own survival. Your life after the touch wasn't a fairy tale. It was real life, complicated, painful, and messy, but you made it through. You navigated the long, uncertain years, holding on to this piece of gold as your anchor. The world outside may be moving into an age of reason and science, but in the quiet of your room, you make peace with your own personal history of faith and superstition. The coin didn't give you a new body, but perhaps it gave you the strength to live in the one you had. Holding the worn gold coin in your hand, you start to ponder a question that the young, skeptical doctor in the coffee house would have appreciated if it wasn't the king's divine power. What was it? If some people truly did get better after being touched, what was the mechanism? You, a man of the 18th century, can only guess. Was it the strength of your faith? Was it the power of the prayers? Was it some quality in the gold itself? You are limited by the knowledge of your time. But looking back from our modern vantage point, we can explore the theories that historians and medical experts now debate. And the most prominent of these is the immense power of the placebo effect. This is the core scientific concept that intersects with our historical narrative. The placebo effect is a phenomenon where a patient's symptoms can improve after receiving a fake or inert treatment, simply because they believe it will work. It's not about imagining you feel better. Placebos can trigger real, measurable physiological changes in the brain and body, such as the release of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers. Now think about the royal touch. It might just be the most perfectly designed placebo in medical history. First, you have the authority of the source. The treatment isn't coming from a questionable local healer or an anonymous apothecary. It's coming from the king himself, the highest, most powerful, most divinely sanctioned authority in the entire country. His endorsement of the cure is absolute. Second, you have the journey and the effort. You didn't just pick up a bottle of tonic at the corner shop. You undertook a difficult, expensive pilgrimage. You invested your time, your money, and all of your emotional energy into this one goal. Psychologically, the greater the investment, the more you need to believe in the outcome. This is a well-known cognitive bias. Third, there's the spectacle and the ritual. The ceremony was a masterful piece of sensory theatre. The grand palace setting, the solemn prayers, the sight of the magnificent king, the hushed reverence of the crowd, the religious chanting, all of it worked together to create a state of heightened emotional and psychological receptivity. It was designed to overwhelm your skepticism and foster belief. Fourth, you get a tangible, valuable token, the gold angel. It's not just a memory, it's a physical object you carry with you. It constantly reinforces the belief that you have been treated. Every time you touch it, you are reminded of the king's promise, strengthening the placebo effect day after day. Given all this, it's not surprising that some people experienced a genuine remission of their symptoms. Their belief was so powerful that it may have mobilized their own body's healing resources. But there's another, simpler explanation that historians also point to: the natural history of the disease itself. Scrofula, being a form of tuberculosis, is a chronic illness with a tendency to wax and wane. It can have long periods of remission where the symptoms seem to disappear, only to flare up again later under stress or due to other illnesses. So imagine this scenario: a person's scrofula is in a particularly bad phase. They are desperate. They make the journey to London and get touched by the king. In the following weeks, their disease naturally enters a remission phase. The sores heal, the lumps shrink. To them, the cause and effect are perfectly clear: the king healed them. They become another success story, another piece of evidence for the power of the touch. They would have no way of knowing that the remission might have happened anyway. Here's a small but important detail: the court only tracked the initial touch. There was no follow-up. The state was not interested in long-term statistical analysis. They created the success stories by performing the ceremony and distributing the coins. What happened afterwards was left to anecdote and rumor, which naturally favors the miraculous tales over the mundane ones. This leads to the great, unresolved debate that historians love. What was the primary driver of the cures? Was it the placebo effect, a genuine triumph of mind over matter, or was it simply people misattributing natural remissions to the royal ceremony? The frustrating but honest answer is that it was likely a complex mixture of both, with different factors being dominant in different cases. For some, the powerful placebo of the ceremony may have been the key. For others, it was just a lucky coincidence of timing. As you sit in your room, you are the living embodiment of this debate. Was your survival a testament to the power of the placebo you carry around your neck? Or did you just happen to have a version of the disease that was chronic but not fatal? One that your body was able to keep in check over the long years? You will never know for sure. You have lived your life on the boundary between faith and biology, miracle and medicine. And in the end, perhaps they were not so different as the young doctor believed. Both, in their own way, were about the fierce, desperate, and enduring power of hope. As you reflect on your long life and the coin that has accompanied you through it, a new, more cynical thought begins to form in your mind. It's a thought that would have been treasonous in your youth. But now, in the twilight of your years, it seems sobering, my Lear. You think back to the grand ceremony, the king's magnificent attire, the solemn prayers, the sheer theatricality of it all, and you ask yourself, who did this ceremony truly serve? You went to Whitehall seeking a cure for your body. But the more you think about it, the more you realize that the king needed that ceremony just as much as you did, if not more. The entire spectacle was less a medical procedure and more a brilliant piece of political propaganda. This is the most critical historical interpretation of the royal touch. While the people came for healing, the monarchy used the ritual to solidify its power. Each person the king touched became a living, breathing argument for the legitimacy of his rule. It was a recurring, public performance that visually reinforced the central pillar of the monarchy, the divine right of kings. Think about it from the king's perspective. Your parliament might challenge your taxes. Rival nobles might plot against you. But how can anyone argue with a miracle? How can they question a king who demonstrates, week after week, that he is a vessel for the power of God? The royal touch was the ultimate political trump card. It elevated the monarch above the grubby, contentious world of politics and placed him in the realm of the sacred. As you sit in your room, you can almost see the gears of statecraft turning. You weren't just a patient. You were a prop. Your sick, suffering body was the canvas upon which the king painted a masterpiece of political legitimacy. The worse your affliction, the more dramatic the potential cure, and the more powerful the message. The long lines of desperate people were not a sign of a public health crisis to the court. They were a sign of the people's faith in their rightful king. A weekly vote of confidence in the Stuart dynasty. This political function became especially crucial in times of instability. For Charles II, newly restored to the throne after a bloody civil war and a decade without a king, the touch was a way to heal the nation's political wounds by seeming to heal its physical ones. It was a way to say, the proper order has been restored, and here is the proof. For Queen Anne, whose claim to the throne was perpetually challenged by the supporters of her exiled half-brother, the touch was a way to assert her legitimacy as a true Stuart heir, possessing the same hereditary magic as her male ancestors. Here's a telling piece of historical trivia. The ceremony was often timed unpublicized to coincide with political tensions. If there was a troublesome parliament session approaching, or if rumors of a plot were circulating, a large, well-attended healing ceremony was a fantastic way to distract the public and remind everyone where the real, God-given power lay. It was a press conference and a religious revival rolled into one. You now see the entire system in a different light. The surgeons who certified you weren't just doctors, they were gatekeepers, ensuring that the props for this royal play were authentic. The gold angel wasn't just a talisman, it was a piece of royal merchandise, a branded souvenir that spread the message of the king's power throughout the kingdom. Every person who went back to their village with a coin and a story became an unpaid propagandist for the crown. Historians are still debating how consciously and cynically this was orchestrated. Did Charles II and his ministers sit in a room and map this out as a public relations strategy? Probably not in those modern terms. But, as shrewd political operators, they instinctively understood the power of spectacle and symbol. They knew that power doesn't just come from armies and laws, it comes from belief. And the royal touch was the most effective belief-generating machine they had. This realization doesn't make you angry. You are too old for that. Instead, it fills you with a strange sense of awe for the sheer brilliance of it all. It was a system where everyone got what they needed. You got hope. The king got legitimacy. You got a chance at a cure, and he got to secure his dynasty. It was a symbiotic relationship between the sick and the powerful. A grand, unspoken bargain. You finger the smooth, bent coin. It is a symbol of your faith. Yes, a testament to your survival. But it is also a token of your small, unwitting role in the great drama of 17th and 18th century politics. You went to the king to be healed, but in doing so, you helped to heal the monarchy itself. As you sit with this new, political understanding of the ceremony, another, more practical question drifts into your mind. You think of the sheer scale of it all, the grand courtyard, the dozens of officials, the royal guards, the chaplains, and, of course, the gold, the thousands upon thousands of gold angel coins, minted and given away year after year. All of it must have cost a fortune. You, who had to sell your meager possessions just to make the journey, suddenly find yourself wondering about the economics of this miracle. Who paid for it all? This leads us to a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of the royal touch: its considerable expense. This was not a cheap ritual. It was a significant line item in the royal budget, a state-funded spectacle of immense proportions. The primary cost, of course, was the gold itself. Let's put this in perspective. The angel coin was a high-value piece of currency, made of nearly pure gold. Giving away thousands of these every year was the modern equivalent of a government handing out luxury watches. Under Charles II, who touched nearly 100 people, the cost was staggering. Historical estimates suggest that the total expense for the touch pieces during his reign was somewhere in the neighborhood of £50, Zereth in 17th century terms. This was an astronomical sum of money, enough to fund a naval expedition or build a grand country estate. Where did this money come from? It came from the state treasury. It came from the taxes levied on people all across the kingdom. In a strange, circular way, the people were funding their own cure. The money collected from a farmer in Yorkshire could have been melted down to create the very coin that was placed around the neck of a sick child from Bristol. But the coins were just the beginning of the expenses. There was also the cost of the ceremony itself. The chaplains, surgeons, and officials who administered the ritual had to be paid. The guards had to be paid. The upkeep of the palace venues, the printing of the certificates, the fine linen towels, the silk ribbons, it all added up. The royal touch was a well-staffed, well-funded government program. And here's a wonderfully absurd economic detail: the system was ripe for fraud. Because the gold angel was so valuable, there was a constant problem with people faking the disease to get the coin. Some would try to go through the line multiple times. Others would create artificial sores on their necks to fool the examining surgeons. The court developed countermeasures, like the certificate system, but clever fraudsters were a persistent issue. The most famous complaint came from one of the king's own surgeons, who grumbled that many idle and worthless persons feigned the disease just to get the charity of the golden angel. So, in addition to the legitimate costs, there was a constant, low-level drain on the treasury from this miracle-based fraud. The king and his government were clearly willing to bear these costs. Why? Because they saw it as a worthwhile investment. The political return, the reinforcement of royal legitimacy and public adoration, was deemed far more valuable than the gold being given away. In the grand calculus of statecraft, Zara was a small price to pay for the demonstrated love of the people and the symbolic proof of God's favor. It was a marketing budget for the brand of the monarchy. Historians who study the economics of royal courts see the royal touch as a prime example of conspicuous consumption as a political tool. By spending lavishly on this public ceremony, the monarchy was demonstrating its wealth, stability, and generosity. It was a way of saying, "We are so powerful and blessed that we can afford to literally give away gold to the sick." It was an act of largesse that inspired awe and loyalty. You looked down at the worn coin in your hand. For you, its value was spiritual. You never would have dreamed of selling it. But you now realize that it was also an economic object, part of a massive financial system of power and propaganda. You were the recipient of a piece of a very expensive, very effective political campaign. The king gave you a gold coin, and in return, you and thousands like you gave him the invaluable currency of your belief. It was, in its own strange way, a perfectly balanced transaction. The state paid in gold, the people paid in faith. As you trace the smooth, worn surface of your angel coin, you remember something the old soldier had said all those years ago. Outside the palace walls, it is not the man, it is the office. He meant that the power came from being the legitimate king. But what if someone else claimed to be the legitimate king? What then? This thought opens up a new, intriguing chapter in the story of the royal touch. It's used not by reigning monarchs, but by those who wanted to be. If the touch was proof of legitimacy, then what better way for a pretender to the throne to make his case than by demonstrating that he, too, possessed the healing gift? This is a fantastic historical reality for centuries. The royal touch was weaponized by claimants and pretenders in the Great Game of Thrones after the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when the Catholic King James I was deposed and fled to France. A powerful political movement known as Jacobitism emerged. The Jacobites believed that James and his descendants were the one true, divinely appointed line of kings. For the next several decades, they plotted to restore the exiled Stuarts to the British throne. And what was one of their key pieces of propaganda, you guessed it? The exiled Stuart kings, living in France and Italy, held their own rival healing ceremonies. James II, his son James Francis Edward Stuart, known as the Old Pretender, and his grandson Charles Edward Stuart, the famous Bonnie, Prince Charlie, all performed the royal touch for their followers and any afflicted persons who sought them out in their exile courts. Imagine the scene. You are a poor, sick English farmer, and you believe the Hanoverian king currently sitting on the throne in London is a foreign usurper. You hear whispers that the true king, the Stuart king in exile, is across the Channel in France, and you hear that he, too, has the healing touch. So you embark on a dangerous, illegal pilgrimage, not to London, but to the French court at Saint-Germain-en-Laye. There, in a borrowed palace, the deposed king performs the same ancient ritual, touching your sores and giving you a gold angel, proving to you and everyone present that he is still God's chosen, despite his earthly misfortunes. This created a war of the touchers. You had the official, state-sanctioned ceremony in London, and you had the guerrilla, dissident ceremony in continental Europe. Each touch was a political statement. To be touched by the Hanoverian king in London was to accept the legitimacy of the new Protestant regime. To be touched by the Stuart pretender in France was an act of treasonous loyalty to the old Catholic line. Your SCR viewer could force you to make a choice that could get you hanged. Here's a wonderfully specific detail. We have the touch pieces to prove it. The exiled Stuart kings minted their own angel coins for their ceremonies. These Jacobite touch pieces are now incredibly rare and valuable collector's items. They are identical in design to the official English ones, but they were struck in foreign mints, often with subtle differences that specialists can identify. Each one is a tiny, metal symbol of rebellion and enduring loyalty. The existence of these rival ceremonies throws the whole idea of legitimacy into chaos. If both the reigning king and the pretender could perform the touch, what did it prove? Who had the real magic? Of course, each side had its own explanation. The Hanoverians and their supporters in London would have dismissed the Jacobite ceremonies as a pathetic charade, a cheap imitation with no real divine power behind it. The Jacobites, on the other hand, would have claimed that any cures performed by the usurper in London were tricks, coincidences, or even the work of the devil. For them, only the touch of the true Stuart king held the authentic, holy magic. This historical episode reveals that the magic of the touch was incredibly flexible. Its power didn't reside in the objective reality of the cure, but in the pre-existing beliefs of the audience. If you already believed the Stuarts were the rightful kings, then their touch would work for you. If you believed the Hanoverians were legitimate, then their touch would be the effective one. The miracle didn't create the belief created the miracle. You think about this, and it adds another layer of complexity to your own experience. You were touched by Charles II, a king whose legitimacy was, at the time, still being solidified after the Civil War. Your participation in his ceremony was a small vote for his side. You realized that your personal quest for health was entangled in a political struggle that spanned generations, a battle of dynasties fought not just with armies, but with prayers, gold coins, and the hope of sick people like you. The story of the royal touch in England, which had flowed like a mighty river for centuries, begins to slow to a trickle after Queen Anne, and the man who effectively built the dam was her successor, King George I. You are an old man now, living in a London that is visibly a city of the new, Hanoverian century. The Stuarts are a memory. Queen Anne is dead. The crown has passed to a German prince, George of Hanover. A man who speaks little English and seems to have little patience for the ancient, mystical traditions of his new kingdom. You hear the stories from the court. When King George I ascended the throne in 1714, he was presented with the usual apparatus for the healing ceremony: the prayer books, the silver bowls, the velvet trays for the gold angels. He was expected to continue the tradition, a practice that had been a staple of English monarchy for nearly 700 years. His reaction became the stuff of legend. This is the pivotal moment when the tradition truly breaks. According to the most famous version of the story, when a courtier encouraged him to perform the touch, the new king refused, saying in his thick German accent something to the effect of, "I think this is a silly superstition." He saw it not as a sacred duty, but as a foolish, popish ritual that had no place in a modern, Protestant kingdom. But the story gets even better. The pressure to perform the ceremony was immense. It was seen as a key part of being a proper English king. So on at least one occasion, he was reluctantly persuaded to meet a group of afflicted subjects. And here we get a wonderfully cynical and hilarious historical anecdote. As one of the supplicates knelt before him, instead of reciting the traditional prayer, King George I is said to have leaned in and muttered, "God give you better health and more sense." This line, whether apocryphal or not, perfectly captures the new spirit of the age. It's a moment of pure, undiluted Enlightenment skepticism colliding with medieval faith. The king wasn't offering a divine cure, he was offering a sarcastic prescription for common sense. He was essentially telling the sick person, "Get well, and stop believing in this nonsense." This was a profound shock to the system. For centuries, the touch was a central part of the monarch's job description. George's refusal to perform it seriously was a clear and public statement. He was breaking with the mystical past of the Stuart dynasty, underlining his new Hanoverian dynasty with modernity, rationality, and a no-nonsense Protestantism. It was a political calculation. By rejecting the touch, he was rejecting the magical basis of the Stuarts he had replaced, framing them as relics of an older, more superstitious time. Of course, this decision was not universally popular. The Jacobites, the supporters of the exiled Stuarts, seized on it immediately. "So," they cried, "the usurper cannot perform the touch because he is not the rightful king. The healing gift has departed from England with its true monarchs." George's refusal to play the game was spun as proof that he couldn't. Historians debate George I's true motivations. Was he a genuine rationalist who thought the whole thing was absurd? Was he a devout, austere Protestant who saw it as a blasphemous Catholic ritual? Or was he a shrewd politician who made a calculated decision to distance his new dynasty from the traditions of his rivals? The answer is probably a mix of all three. He was a man of a different culture and a different mindset. And the bizarre, theatrical ritual of the royal touch simply did not compute for him. His son, George I, followed his father's lead. He too, refused to perform the ceremony. The official prayer for the royal touch was quietly removed from the Book of Common Prayer. The minting of the gold angels ceased. The whole elaborate machinery that had been running for centuries was simply switched off. For you, this is a strange and disorienting development. You, who built your life around a single touch from a king, now live in a kingdom where the king himself mocks the very idea. The world has moved on. The belief that once united thousands of people in the courtyards of Whitehall now seems like a quaint, embarrassing memory from a bygone era. You clutch your worn coin. It feels less like a symbol of eternal truth and more like a fossil. A relic from an extinct world of belief, the age of miracles. It seems, is officially over. Living in this new London, under the practical, no-nonsense Hanoverian kings, you feel like a ghost from another era. The coffee houses buzz with talk not of miracles, but of machines. People are excited about new inventions, new discoveries in astronomy, new ideas about government and human rights. A powerful new force is sweeping through Europe. A force that will do more to end the royal touch than any king's decree. That force is the Enlightenment. This is the intellectual sea change that provides the final context for our story. The Enlightenment was a philosophical movement that dominated the world of ideas in 18th century Europe. Its central tenets were the celebration of reason, the importance of the individual, and a skepticism towards traditional authority, whether that authority was the church or the monarchy. Thinkers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Isaac Newton had, in their own ways, argued that the universe was not a mysterious, magical place run by divine whim, but an orderly, rational system governed by natural laws that could be discovered and understood by the human mind. You see the effects of this new thinking everywhere. You see pamphlets being sold that question the right of kings to rule without the consent of the governed. You hear discussions about new scientific methods based on evidence-on experimentation. The world is becoming demystified, de-enchanted, and in this new, brightly lit world of reason, a belief like the royal touch begins to look not just old-fashioned, but ridiculous. The very idea of a hereditary magical power, passed down through a single bloodline, was anathema to Enlightenment thinking. If all men were born with the capacity for reason, why should one man, simply by virtue of his birth, be able to cure a disease with his fingertips? It made no logical sense. The royal touch was based on faith, hierarchy, and mystery, the very things the Enlightenment sought to dismantle. It's in this climate that the medical profession finds the confidence to fully and publicly reject the practice. A doctor in the 1720s who openly called the touch a superstition might still fear censure. A doctor in the 1760s would be praised for his modern, scientific outlook. The ground has completely shifted. The burden of proof is no longer on the skeptics to disprove the miracle, it's on the believers to prove it in the face of scientific reason. And here's a specific, telling example of this shift. Voltaire, the great French Enlightenment writer and professional cynic, wrote about the royal touch. He didn't just dismiss it, he subjected it to withering sarcasm. He famously quipped about the cure after the English king had stopped performing it, noting how strange it was that the English kings had lost this gift ever since the people had cut off one of their heads. He treated the entire, centuries-long tradition as a joke, a symbol of the ignorance and credulity of the past. When an idea becomes the punchline of a famous philosopher's joke, you know its time on the public stage is well and truly over. You experience this change on a personal level. One day, a young boy in your neighborhood points at the warm coin you still sometimes wear visibly over your shirt. "Where's that old medal?" he asks. You begin to tell him the story of the king's touch, of your journey to Whitehall, of the great ceremony. You expect him to be awestruck. Instead, he just laughs. "My father says that's just an old wives' tale," he says, and runs off to play. The boy's casual dismissal stings more than any doctor's argument. In a single generation, the most sacred ritual of the kingdom has become a children's fairy tale. The belief has evaporated from the culture, leaving behind only an empty husk of a story. The historical debate here isn't about whether the Enlightenment killed the royal touch, it clearly did, but about how deep that skepticism ran. While the educated elites in London and Paris might have been reading Voltaire and celebrating reason, did the old beliefs linger on in the countryside? Almost certainly. The death of a superstition is never clean or quick. It fades away slowly, retreating into folk memory and local traditions. But, as a state-sanctioned, mainstream belief, its back was broken. You sit by your window, watching the bustling street. The world has become a louder, brighter, and more rational place, and it has no room for kings who heal with a touch. Your angel coin, once a passport to a miracle, is now just a piece of history, a silent witness to a time when the universe felt a little more magical. The end of a 700-year-old tradition doesn't happen with a thunderclap. It happens with a quiet fizzle. There is no grand announcement, no final decree. The royal touch simply stops, and life goes on. You witness its final, silent disappearance. After George I refused to perform the ceremony, the institution was effectively dead. By the time the long-reigning George I comes to the throne in 1760, the idea of him touching the sick is simply unthinkable. He is a modern monarch for a new kind of Britain, one that is building a global empire and powering an industrial revolution. He is concerned with steam engines and parliament, not sacred swords. The official end is so subtle that you barely notice it. It's the final removal of the ceremony X from the prayer book. It's the last of the old believers dying out. It's the moment when a story ceases to be a living faith and becomes mere history. This is the key point. Traditions of this magnitude rarely have a clear-cut ending. They fade from cultural relevance long before they are officially pronounced dead. The royal touch was obsolete for decades before it truly vanished. You feel this fading in your own life. Your story, which once commanded respect and awe, now gets you a polite, slightly pitying smile. People look at you as a charming relic, a man with a strange tale from the olden days. The coin around your neck is no longer seen as a sacred object, but as a quaint antique. It has lost its public meaning and now holds only your own private, personal significance. The disappearance of the ceremony leaves a kind of vacuum. For centuries, it was the ultimate hope for those afflicted with scrofula. So what replaces it? The answer is nothing. At first, medicine is still struggling, fumbling in the dark. But the crucial difference is where people now look for a cure. They no longer line up at the palace gates. Instead, they begin to line up at the doors of the new hospitals and dispensaries that are starting to appear in cities like London. This is a profoundly important social shift. The responsibility for caring for the sick is slowly moving from the domain of the king and the church to the domain of civil society and the emerging medical profession. The new heroes are not kings, but doctors and scientists. The new sacred texts are not prayer books, but medical journals. And here's a wonderful, specific detail that illustrates this transition perfectly. In France, the tradition of the royal touch limped on a bit longer than in England. The French kings, more tied to their Catholic and absolutist traditions, continued the practice. The final, official royal touch in France was performed in 1825 by King Charles X. He was attempting to revive the old glories of the monarchy after the French Revolution and Napoleon. The ceremony was widely mocked as a ridiculous and desperate anachronism. It was seen as a pathetic attempt to turn back the clock. The world had moved on, and his clinging to this ancient ritual only made him look foolish and out of touch. His reign did not last long. The story of the royal touch, which for centuries was a story of faith, politics, and power, now becomes the story about memory. It's relegated to the pages of history books, a curious footnote about the strange beliefs of your ancestors. Historians who study the end of the tradition argue about its legacy. Did its disappearance signal a loss of faith, a hollowing out of the spiritual core of the community, or did it represent a triumph of reason? A necessary step in the maturation of society towards a more scientific worldview? Perhaps it was both. Something was lost, a sense of enchantment, a direct connection to the sacred. But something was gained, a commitment to finding real, verifiable cures for human suffering. You and your final years are a living bridge between these two worlds. You remember a time when hope came from a king's hand. You have lived to see a time when hope comes from a doctor's mind. The palace courtyard where you knelt, trembling with hope, has long since been rebuilt. The line of the sick is gone. The chaplain's prayers have fallen silent. The entire, first, centuries-old spectacle has vanished into the mists of time, leaving behind only a few scattered gold coins in the faint, lingering memory of a belief that once seemed as solid and eternal as the stones of London itself. You are now ancient, a man out of time. Your skin is a parchment of wrinkles. Your hands are gnarled with age, but your mind is still clear. You have become a landmark in your own neighborhood, a living piece of history who sits on a bench in the sun, watching a world that has accelerated beyond your wildest imaginations. The city is a roaring symphony of iron and steam. The air is still smoky, but the talk is of progress, of a future you know you will not see. And in this new, bustling world, you notice an absence. It's a quiet, gradual thing. At first, you don't even register it. But then you realize you no longer see people with the king's evil. In your youth, they were everywhere, a constant, visible stratum of society. The children with bandaged necks, the young adults hiding their scars. Now, they are almost gone. The disease that defined your life, that sent you on your great pilgrimage, seems to be vanishing from the earth. One day, you ask a young doctor who sometimes stops to chat with you on his rounds. "Doctor," you say, your voice a dry rustle of leaves, "in my day, the king's evil was a plague upon us. Where has it gone?" The young doctor smiles. The kind, modern smile. "We don't call it that anymore, old friend," he says. "We call it tuberculosis. And we know what causes it." He then tells you the most incredible story you have ever heard. A story more magical than any tale of a king's touch. This is the final, scientific chapter of our tale, the discovery of the germ. The doctor explains that in France, a man named Pasteur, and in Germany, a man named Koch, using powerful new microscopes, had discovered that many diseases are caused by tiny, invisible living creatures, bacilli, germs. The king's evil wasn't a curse, or a humoral imbalance, or a spiritual malaise. It was an invasion, a siege by an unseen army. This idea is so profoundly alien that you can barely grasp it. Your entire life, you understood the world in terms of the visible and the spiritual. To be told that your lifelong companion, the enemy that shaped you, was a creature too small to be seen. It's a revelation that shakes the very foundations of your reality. The universe is not what you thought it was. The doctor goes on, explaining that they found that this tiny creature often lived in cattle and could pass into humans through their milk. "That's why we tell everyone to boil their milk now," he says, pointing to a public notice pasted on a wall. "Cleanliness, pasteurization. That's the new magic." The solution wasn't a king's prayer, but a boiling pot. So simple, so mundane, so revolutionary. And then you learn about the new treatments. This brings us to a beautiful and peculiar medical fact, the discovery of heliotherapy, the sun cure. The young doctor tells you that one of the best treatments for the sores of SC is simple, direct sunlight. A Danish doctor named Niels Finsen had shown that the sun's rays could kill the tubercle bacillus in the skin. Suddenly, a new memory clicks into place for you. You have seen this. On the grounds of the new hospitals, you've seen patients sitting in rows of chairs, their necks and chests exposed to the sun for hours at a time. It's a new kind of ritual, a new pilgrimage. They are no longer traveling to the king's court to seek the light of his divine grace. They are traveling to the hospital garden to seek the light of the common sun. The source of the miracle has moved from the palace to the sky. But the young doctor is honest. "We have many ideas," he admits, "and the historians will probably argue about it forever." This is the final historical debate of our story: what truly caused the dramatic decline of tuberculosis in the 19th century. Even before the invention of antibiotics, was it specific medical interventions like sanatoriums and the sun cure? Was it broad public health measures like sanitation and milk pasteurization? Or was it simply the slow, steady improvement in general nutrition and living standards that made people's bodies more resilient to the disease in the first place? Experts still debate the relative importance of each factor. There was no single magic bullet, but rather a barrage of small, rational improvements. You thank the doctor and sit back, absorbing it all. The world didn't find one cure for the king's evil. It found 100 small ones: cleaner streets, better food, more sunlight, boiled milk, knowledge. It wasn't a touch. It was a tide of progress that slowly, inexorably washed the disease away. You look down at your own hands, at the body that has carried this disease for nearly a century. You survived. Were you just lucky, or did the hope from that gold coin give you the will to endure until the world changed around you, bringing with it the small, mundane miracles that would save future generations? You touch the angel coin, which you now keep in your pocket. It is a relic of a vanquished world. The king's evil, your old foe, was not defeated by a rival king or a more powerful god. It was defeated by knowledge, by reason, by people looking not up to the heavens for a miracle, but down into a microscope for a cause. And that, you decide, is a far more profound and hopeful story than the one you started with. And so, it comes to this. The final reckoning. You are lying in your bed. The sounds of a 19th century city are distant, muffled draw outside your window. The long, strange, incredible journey of your life is nearing its end. Your breath is shallow. The soft rhythm in the quiet room. Your body is a frail vessel, but your mind is a vast archive, and you are taking one last walk through its halls. You reach into the small pouch by your bedside and your fingers, thin and papery, close around it one last time. The coin, your angel. You hold it in your palm. It is impossibly smooth now, a featureless disc of gold, its history worn away by the loving friction of a lifetime. It is no longer an image of an archangel or a king, it is a mirror reflecting your own long story. You think about how the world remembers the royal touch now. It has become a curiosity, a piece of historical trivia. This is the final stage of any belief's death, its transformation into an anecdote. Scholars write books about it. They analyze it, deconstruct it, label it. They call it an expression of charismatic authority or a two-love state building. It is no longer a living, breathing miracle. It is a specimen under glass, studied by the very rational minds who would have scoffed at it in your youth. And in its afterlife, the belief has mutated into strange new forms. This is a final, wonderfully bizarre piece of folklore you once heard. Some old merchants, long after the ceremony had ended, kept their ancestral touch pieces not for health, but for business. They believed that the king's gold was so pure, so divinely true, that if you rubbed a suspect coin against it, the counterfeit's lesser nature would be revealed. The magic of healing was gone, but a new magic of truth-telling had taken its place. The coin was no longer a cure for the body, but a cure for deception. The idea makes you smile a weak, dry smile. Your life has been the ultimate case study in this strange phenomenon. You have lived through the entire arc from absolute faith, to hopeful doubt, to political understanding, to scientific explanation. And now, at the very end, you must render your own verdict. This is the great debate that will forever surround the royal touch, the one historians will never truly settle. Was it a cynical, manipulative fraud perpetrated by the powerful on the desperate and the ignorant, a masterpiece of propaganda designed to uphold a tyrannical system, using the sick as mere props? Or was it something else? Was it a vital form of psychological and social medicine in an age that had no other, a shared ritual that gave meaning to suffering, that created hope where there was none, that bound the kingdom together from the monarch on his throne to the poorest beggar in the street, in a common fabric of belief? Was it a lie that healed, or a truth that exploited? You hold the coin in your palm, its faint warmth spreading through your cold fingers, and in this final, lucid moment, you realize the answer. It was both. The hope it gave you was real. The comfort it brought you was real. The will to live it instilled in you was real. For you, the boy on his knees in the courtyard. The magic was entirely, undeniably true. And the cynical political calculation behind it was also true. The propaganda was real. The manipulation was real. The system used your desperation for its own ends. The lie and the truth were not opposites. They were two sides of the same golden coin. They did not cancel each other out. You have lived a life suspended between them, a life made possible by both. You needed the lie to survive, and the king needed your belief to rule. It was the grand, unspoken, and profoundly human bargain of your time. You close your eyes. The weight of the coin in your hand is the only thing that feels real. It is no longer a symbol of a king's power or a doctor's debate. It is simply the anchor of your own story, your pilgrimage, your touch, your life. And so, your long story comes to a close, and you begin to drift. The edges of the memory begin to soften now. The sharp details of the journey, the dusty roads, the crowded streets, the stern face of the surgeon, they all blur into feelings. The ache of despair gives way to the warmth of hope. The cold of the cobblestones dissolves into the gentle pressure of a king's hand. There is no need to think anymore, no need to question or to understand. The great debates of history fade away, their loud arguments becoming a soft, distant murmur, like the crowd outside the palace gate. The heavy weight of the coin in your hand seems to lighten, becoming a golden shimmer, a single point of light in the growing dark. It is the sun in the hospital garden. It is the glint of a jewel on a velvet coat. It is a flickering candle of belief that has guided you all this way, to this final, peaceful shore. The current is carrying you gently now, on a quiet river of sea, past the grand palaces and the humble rooms, past the noise of reason and the silence of faith. All the questions have been answered, or have faded into unimportance. There is only quiet, undressed, and the soft, steady weight of a story told. The end of the article. Good night.